How do you survive biting the heads off bats, snorting ants by the pool, and living through decades of addiction, only to be taken down by time itself? For years, fans believed Ozzy Osbourne was unstoppable, a man who defied death so many times, it felt like he'd somehow made a deal with the devil. Or maybe he was the devil. But at 76, the Prince of Darkness has finally fallen, and while the world mourns the loss of a rock icon, it's his final performance. A heartbreaking, almost surreal moment that's left fans speechless. It wasn't the loud guitars, the screaming crowd, or the fire raining down from the stage. No, it was the sight of a man who once ruled the world, now barely able to stand, pouring everything he had left into one last show. But before the lights went out, Ozzy left us with more than a farewell. He left us a legacy filled with chaos, controversy, and stories so outrageous you wouldn't believe them if they weren't true. And trust me, they get dark. The world woke up to a headline no one was ready for. Ozzy Osbourne is dead at 76. It didn't feel real, because how could it? This was the man who outlived overdoses, survived tour bus crashes, and even bit the head off a live bat on stage, and smiled through it. Fans had long joked that Ozzy wasn't human, that he was some kind of indestructible force, a creature born from pure chaos. But in the end, even he couldn't escape what none of us can. Ozzy had been quietly battling Parkinson's disease for years, and while the world saw glimpses of his decline, many still believed he'd make one more comeback. He always did. But this time, there was no backstage recovery, no defiant roar from the mic stand, just silence, and the shock of realizing that one of rock's loudest voices had finally gone quiet. His wife Sharon, who stood beside him through addiction, arrests, and rehab, is reportedly devastated, as is the rest of their family. He had lived long enough to see his daughter Kelly get engaged, one last proud moment before everything faded. And yet, even in his final days, Ozzy gave us one last show. Not just a performance, but a moment. Emotional, fragile, unforgettable. But that wasn't the whole story. Because what happened on that stage left fans torn between awe and heartbreak. It wasn't the show fans expected, and it certainly wasn't the Ozzy Osbourne they remembered. In his final performance, Ozzy was wheeled onto the stage, frail, visibly struggling to hold himself upright, eyes clouded by pain, but still burning with determination. He couldn't stand. He could barely speak. And yet, there he was, refusing to go quietly. For many, it was painful to watch. A living legend, once feared and worshipped like a god of rock, now clinging to the microphone like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Some fans even admitted they felt conflicted, torn between admiration for his courage and discomfort at seeing him in such a vulnerable state. But Ozzy wasn't there for sympathy. He was there for something far deeper. He had a message, and maybe even a mission. At one point during the show, he shared a quiet moment with British rocker Youngblood, a rising artist who Ozzy had reportedly grown fond of. The two exchanged words backstage, and many saw it as symbolic. Ozzy passing the torch, blessing a new generation of chaos. "You gave me an outlet," Youngblood told him, clearly emotional. "Everyone thought I was too mad, but I was like, nah, man, I'm like Ozzy." It was a rare moment of softness in a career filled with madness. Ozzy didn't just inspire artists. He gave the misfits and the outcasts permission to be exactly who they were, even when the world told them they were too much. As the final chords faded and the stage lights dimmed, fans knew they had witnessed something rare, a farewell not wrapped in glamour or spectacle, but raw, honest vulnerability. But for Ozzy, it wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up one last time, no matter how broken his body was. And what came after was a reminder of just how wild this man's life really was. Long before memes, viral clips, or chaotic celebrity interviews, Ozzy Osbourne was already a walking headline. To some, he was just that bizarre British guy from the Osbournes, bumbling through his mansion, mumbling incoherently, and yelling at dogs. But behind the reality show antics was a man who had already lived a life so extreme, it made most rock stars look tame. Ozzy wasn't just famous, he was feared. His band, Black Sabbath, practically invented heavy metal. They didn't just play loud music, they summoned darkness. Church groups protested, parents panicked, and Ozzy, he thrived on it. The scarier he seemed, the more powerful he became. But what really set Ozzy apart wasn't just the music, it was everything else. The insanity that followed him everywhere, because where other stars had scandals, Ozzy had legends. He wasn't just wild, he was the kind of unfiltered, unpredictable chaos that made even his bandmates nervous. No one knew what he'd do next, and half the time, neither did he. And if you thought snapping at the paparazzi or smashing hotel rooms made someone a rock star, then you clearly haven't heard the stories that made Ozzy the king of carnage. Because the next chapter, it involves doves, bats, and a horrifying night with 17 cats. Ozzy Osbourne didn't just flirt with chaos, he married it, fed it raw meat, and let it loose on stage. The stories involving animals aren't just disturbing, they're the kind that make even hardcore fans ask, wait, he did what? Let's start with the cats. In the depths of addiction, during one of his worst benders, Ozzy reportedly locked himself inside his mansion for days, armed with nothing but drugs, booze, and a shotgun. What happened next still haunts Sharon to this day. 17 of their cats were found dead. Ozzy, barely conscious, had slaughtered them, later claiming he was in a full-blown psychotic breakdown. Sharon, horrified, almost left him for good. But like so many times before, she stayed. And the madness continued. Then came the dove incident. It was supposed to be a peace offering. Literally. During a meeting with record label executives, Ozzy was asked to show a gentler side. So he brought 2 white doves and promptly bit the head off one, blood splattering all over the shocked suits. He was immediately kicked out of the building. And just like that, his legend was born. But it didn't stop there. The most infamous act came during a live concert in 1982, when a fan threw what Ozzy assumed was a rubber bat onto the stage. It wasn't rubber. He grabbed it, bit down, and instantly felt warm blood gush into his mouth. The bat was real, and still alive. Ozzy was rushed to the hospital for rabies shots, and headlines exploded across the globe. Parents were outraged. Religious groups called him satanic, but for millions of fans, it just made him even more iconic. Whether it was psychosis, performance art, or pure shock value, one thing became crystal clear. Ozzy didn't follow rules. He destroyed them. And yet, somehow, this was still only the beginning of the madness. Because the real insanity, it started when the drugs took over, and science couldn't explain how he survived. By all logic, Ozzy Osbourne should have been dead decades ago. We're not just talking about rock star partying or the occasional wild night. Ozzy's drug use was so extreme, so non-stop, and so chemically insane that even scientists couldn't understand how he was still walking, let alone singing. In fact, geneticists actually studied his DNA. Yes, real scientists ran a full genetic analysis to try and figure out how he had outlived nearly all of his hard-partying peers. Their conclusion? Ozzy's body processed drugs differently than a normal human's. It was almost like his system had mutated to survive the chaos. He once admitted to doing acid every single day for over a year. That's not an exaggeration. For 365 days straight, Ozzy flooded his brain with mind-melting psychedelics and somehow still made it to band rehearsals. There were nights he'd black out for entire weekends, waking up with no memory of what city he was in or what he'd done. Bandmates feared for their lives. Managers couldn't control him. And even his doctors were stunned he hadn't overdosed multiple times. He wasn't just doing drugs. He was trying to break the limits of human biology. At one point, his drug use got so bad that Sharon had to check him into rehab while he was asleep, literally tricking him into recovery. And when that didn't work, she hid his clothes, locked him inside their house, and forced him into detox with nothing but withdrawal and regret. Even Ozzy himself once said, "I should be dead 1,000 times over." But somehow, he wasn't. He was still performing, still terrifying hotel staff, still breaking the rules. And yet, behind the madness, something darker was brewing. Something even the wildest parties couldn't drown out. Because Ozzy wasn't just addicted to substances, he was addicted to chaos. And soon, that addiction would turn violent, with consequences that hit far too close to home. For decades, Ozzy and Sharon Osbourne were seen as an unbreakable force. Chaotic, yes, but deeply bonded. She managed his career, cleaned up his messes, and pulled him back from the edge more times than anyone could count. But behind the loyalty and late-night talk show laughs, there was a moment so dark it almost ended everything. In 1989, Ozzy was deep in addiction, drinking, using, spiraling. One night, in a blackout haze, he looked at Sharon and calmly told her, "We've come to a decision. You have to die." Then he lunged at her, trying to strangle her with his bare hands. Sharon later revealed that his eyes were blank, gone, like there was nothing human left in him. She managed to escape and hit the panic button in their home, summoning police. Ozzy was arrested and charged with attempted murder. He woke up in jail the next morning, with no memory of what he had done. It wasn't the first time Ozzy had gotten violent, but it was the closest he ever came to truly losing everything. And still, after all of that, Sharon didn't leave. Instead, she gave him a choice. Go to rehab, or I'm gone for good. Ozzy chose rehab, and somehow, against every odd, they stayed together. But the damage wasn't erased. The incident became a chilling reminder that behind the theatrics, behind the Prince of Darkness persona, was a man utterly controlled by addiction and capable of terrifying things. It wasn't a tabloid scandal. It wasn't a PR stunt. It was real, raw, brutal. And for the fans who idolized him, it was a gut punch. Because if Sharon, the woman who saved him 100 times, could almost become his victim, then maybe Ozzy's darkness wasn't just an act, but just when it seemed he'd disappear forever into rehab and regret, something unexpected happened. A second chance no one saw coming, delivered in the unlikeliest form: reality TV. Most people would have vanished after everything Ozzy had been through, the arrests, the addiction, the near-death moments. But somehow, he didn't just survive, he kept showing up. Even as his body began to give out and his voice grew shaky, Ozzy refused to walk away from the spotlight. He was no longer the wild-eyed demon stomping across stages. But he was still Ozzy, still magnetic, still unpredictable. And that's what made his final years both inspiring and heartbreaking. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a brutal condition that slowly stripped him of the control he once had over his body. Simple things became impossible. Concerts were canceled, fans worried, rumors of his death trended constantly. But every time the world counted him out, he came crawling back, scarred, limping, but undeniably alive. His last album, Patient Number 9, released in 2022, wasn't just another record. It was a farewell letter, drenched in pain, memory, and the kind of reflection only a man who danced with death could write. Critics called it one of his most emotional works in years. Fans clung to it like a final hug. And despite multiple spinal surgeries, hospital stays, and endless health scares, Ozzy made one last appearance, frail but determined, at a rock event, barely able to stand, but still holding the mic. That wasn't a performance. It was a statement. I'm not done until I say I'm done. He knew the end was near. And rather than hide, he faced it head on, the same way he lived his life. Loud, stubborn, and unforgettable. But even in death, the story doesn't end, because what Ozzy leaves behind isn't just music. It's mystery, controversy, and a legacy that still has fans asking, who was Ozzy Osbourne really? Ozzy Osbourne was never supposed to be a legend. He was the son of a toolmaker from Birmingham, poor, misunderstood, and constantly in trouble. No one expected him to change music. No one expected him to survive this long. And yet, he didn't just survive. He became a symbol for chaos, for pain, for reinvention, and for raw, unfiltered humanity. His story isn't clean. It's not polished. It's full of darkness, regret, and decisions that can't be undone. But maybe that's exactly why it still matters. Because in a world full of curated perfection, Ozzy was brutally real. He wore his scars like badges. He failed loudly, loved deeply, and lived a life so chaotic it baffled science and terrified critics. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't a villain, he was Ozzy. And now, as tributes pour in and fans across the globe mourn, one thing becomes crystal clear. You can't rewrite a legacy like his. You can't sanitize it or explain it away. You can only watch it burn bright, even in death. The Prince of Darkness may have taken his final bow, but the myth, that'll echo forever, through shattered hotel rooms, midnight bat bites, and the whispers of a man who shouldn't have made it, but did anyway.